Welcome to Tipping Points, where we ask the questions that matter about conservation and development. My name is Max Makwise. I'm the Resident Director of Shangani Holistic, which is part of the Oppenheimer Generations community and work very, very closely with Oppenheimer Research and Conservation. Thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure having you today. Through sustainable use, the wildlife economy presents an opportunity to conserve landscapes and wildlife while creating economic growth and meeting the sustainable development goals. However, effective, accountable, inclusive institutions, as well as transparency, a robust regulatory framework, and good governance are required to realistically achieve this triple bottom line. The wildlife economy is multi-sectoral and complex, and presents multiple opportunities for collaboration and partnership between diverse stakeholders. Here we expand the word community beyond its common use and in the development sector to include the range of stakeholder groups or communities that must be involved for a successful wildlife economy. In this episode of Tipping Points, we explore how these communities can be connected through an equitable wildlife economy to create opportunities along the entire value chain, from sustainable livelihoods to industry development and private sector investment. We have some speakers here who are going to take us through the topics. The reason I was reading is because if I didn't, I'd be talking for the next 10 minutes. So I'm pleased to introduce our outstanding panel, pioneers in the field and hand-selected to give an interdisciplinary perspective. We first of all have Victor K. Muposhi. Victor is a conservation leadership faculty at the African Leadership University School of Wildlife Conservation, and is also an associate professor of wildlife management at Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. He's also an AWEI Research Fellow, where he is exploring wildlife economy innovations in East and Southern Africa. Following him, we'll have Chanda Mwale. Chanda is a natural resources specialist focusing on the wildlife economy sector. Chanda is Executive Director of the Wildlife Producers Association of Zambia, where she is the strategic and programmatic lead for the association's first full-time secretariat. She is passionate about Africa charting its own path to sustainable development and ensuring this is done through innovative partnerships. Our third speaker will be Tariro Kamuti. Dr. Tariro Kamuti is a research fellow at the African Wildlife Economy Institute at Stellenbosch University, as well as the Global Risk Governance Program at the University of Cape Town and the Earth System Governance. Tariro is currently working on game farming / wildlife ranching and wildlife policy in South Africa. So this part of the session will run for about 30 minutes, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. All questions, please, could I ask that they're directed through the chat box so we can take them on there. So just get the ball rolling. Victor, if I hand over to you, please take us through your presentation.
Thank you, Max. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be talking to you about connecting communities and how we can build inclusive wildlife economies. My presentation outline is going to focus on the main things. Number one, resilient communities, where I'm going to set the scenario there. And then number two, the wildlife economy and sustainable livelihood. And number three, leveraging value chains for economic growth. Because we believe that whenever we intersect society, economics, and the environment, we should be able to achieve sustainability. And for us to be able to leverage the wildlife economy and ensuring that we are able to connect communities, we must be able to harness the power of nature, of our natural heritage, the environment, to address societal needs and economic needs for us to be able to achieve sustainability. Briefly, I'm going to highlight or go through my slide for the first aspect, which talks about resilient communities within the context of wildlife economies. I will start by asking a question, what a community is, because we want to talk about connecting communities. Essentially, we know that a community is a group of people with common interests. And in some schools of thought, it is a group of people whose action or actions are within the same geographical space. And this community shares the same social ties, cultural and heritage-related ties. And they are governed by the same norms, values, and customs. Within this context, these people do share common perspectives. And they are also a grouping of people that advocate and support each other. So I was saying that I'm going to talk about resilient communities, the wildlife economy and sustainable livelihoods, and then I'm going to talk about how we can leverage value chains for economic growth. Next slide, please. And so for start, allow me to define what a community is within the context of wildlife economy. Essentially, it is a grouping of people with common interests whose actions occur within the same geographical space, and they share social ties, cultural and heritage ties. And this grouping of people is thought to be governed by the same norms, values, and customs. And within that very same context, these people also share some common perspectives about their surroundings, about their needs, about their challenges, and because of that, they share the same problems and advocate and support each other. And because of this understanding of what a community is, I would like to zero in and talk about those communities that interact with wildlife and within the natural space, and say that these people have deep historic ties with nature, and therefore conservation and sustainability issues are not something that is new to them. And within that context, most of these communities that surrounding protected areas or conservation areas tend to be marginalized, and they have some historical injustices that they have actually experienced. And to some extent, some of these communities feel isolated from benefiting from their natural heritage, but still believe that sustainable use is key for them to achieve or for them to have sustainable livelihoods. Next slide, please. And because of those common interests, we want to then look at how best we can leverage and look at the wildlife economy itself within the context of sustainable development, economic growth, and possibly industrialization. And because we believe that a wildlife economy is one that considers the value and contribution of resources in sustainable growth, economic development through enterprises and livelihoods that are based on biological products or services generated thereof. Next slide, please. And allow me to bring you to the attention of some key wildlife economy activities and link these to sustainable livelihoods for communities. I would start by talking about how do we achieve an inclusive wildlife economy. There are various approaches in which communities can benefit from wildlife or from natural resources, from natural capital within the areas that they occur. Number one can be achieved through sustainable tourism, where you have ecotourism, but because we want to ensure that these initiatives are sustainable and local communities can benefit. Not all communities have opportunities or facilities that enable or attract tourists to visit. And therefore, it is important to be innovative in the manner in which we look at tourism initiatives, to consider issues to do with village B&Bs or rural B&Bs, a concept that is being promoted by one of the Zimbabweans based in Victoria Falls, where they are trying to push this within the region. How can we leverage on the natural resource base, our natural cuisines, based on the products that we get from nature, and be able to attract tourists? So we should be able also to develop documentaries about our culture and how it links to our natural heritage. We can also consider the second aspect that relates to hunting and tourism for communities. And some communities have opportunities because they are endowed with wildlife. They live in areas that have rich wildlife base, and therefore they can actually venture into hunting tourism and fishing and be able to generate income out of this. This is a practice that has been going on for some time, but unfortunately, there are a lot of challenges surrounding hunting, but there are also opportunities that relate to eco-labeling and certification of hunting activities that are sustainable, and therefore we can still promote these as one of the initiatives within a wildlife economy base. And the next aspect is game ranching. Game ranching is something that is very common, mostly in Southern Africa, looking at South Africa, looking at Zambia, looking at Namibia mostly. But Zimbabwe used to have lots of game ranching, but because of the 2000 land reform and the subsequent 2004 land redistribution program that related to wildlife-based land reform program, resulted of these being destroyed, and the mileage that Zimbabwe had taken going backwards. But there are opportunities of re-engaging people and ensuring that we leverage on game ranching and have community game ranch approaches where communities are capacitated to ensure that they're able to benefit from their wildlife beyond aspects of hunting. And then the fourth one deals with forestry products. And with forestry products, we are looking mostly at non-timber forestry products. We are looking at beekeeping. We are looking at processing, chemicals or biochemicals that are related to products that we get from nature. We are looking at bioprospecting opportunities. Because of the indigenous knowledge system that is rich within some of these communities, it is very possible to take advantage of that. But therefore, it is important for us to make sure that if we have communities which are integrated and there is cohesion amongst these communities are connected, they can leverage on their knowledge, they can leverage on their skills, and also seek a cooperation with others who can build capacity and also funding opportunities to ensure that they're able to develop products and actually startups for them to start businesses. And if we have, therefore, economies of scale, leverage on that to make sure that we are able to then attain and get sustainable livelihoods. Yes, of course, we can talk of carbon market. Not all communities can tap into this, but there are those that also tap into carbon markets. And within this whole context, it is important to note that for this to happen, governance and policy environment has to be enabling. And because of that, many communities can benefit only if the community push policy narratives, push policy directives that promote the cooperation and participation of communities in wildlife economies and be able to contribute to economic growth and industrialization. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And because for us to actually achieve sustainability beyond the normal hunting that many people believe communities benefit from, and non-timber forestry products, we are saying that we should leverage on indigenous knowledge system and promote innovation and product development, and therefore promote value chain development, ensure that there is participation and specialization from which communities can therefore share risks, and ensure that their products can reach a wider market. And promote local and regional value chains, where we then say that non-tariff barriers are then dealt with, and we are able to promote trade beyond our villages, beyond our country, beyond the borders, and develop synergies that enables communities to build capacity, technical and financial support from financial institutions, from philanthropic organizations. I'm happy we have organizations such as the Oppenheimer that seek to promote research that interrogates and promote conversations around these to ensure that we are able to stimulate debate and discussions to promote economic growth and sustainable livelihoods within communities. And therefore, that links the aspects of diversification of opportunities, where we want to promote communities to move from primary products and services to value-added products, and so that they can manage. And for that to happen, there has to be change management. And this requires the community of practice to promote and ensure that it is achieved. Next slide, please. So this is my last submission, to say that for us to be able to achieve success, we need to promote and ensure that there are diverse and nested appropriate institutions to support these communities to drive these initiatives. And secondly, we need to have good governance practices, holistic legislative and policy frameworks in place in order to promote the initiatives. We also need a multi-stakeholder engagement for cooperation and empowering local communities to ensure that communities are the ones that are at the center of everything that is being done, and that there's sharing of benefits. This could be tangible or intangible heritage on the basis of what the resources are there within these communities. And also that there has to be a disposition to adopt evidence-based decision mechanisms for best practices, so that communities can share and develop a community of practice, and they can share ideas, they can share experiences, and grow their businesses. And finally, for all that to happen, it is important to promote innovative and value chain models through strategic partnerships. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mark.
Victor, thank you very much. That was very insightful. You asked a very good question. Your very good question was, what is a community? I think that's something we might broach that topic later on in the question and answer session. Thanks so much for that and for your talk. We're now going to move on to our next presenter, Chanda. Just also, if you have any comments on the previous speech, please feel free to add that before you could take it away. Thank you very much.
Hello. I was muted and spoke to myself for all of 20 seconds. Oh, Zoom bingo. I hope you can all see my screen. Thanks, Max, for the confirmation. Thank you, Victor, for that presentation. My name is Chanda. I am with the Wildlife Producers Association of Zambia. I will start off by saying I'm struggling with a bit of a sore throat. So if I intermittently mute in order to cough, please forgive me. But anyway, so my presentation on how we can generate inclusive wildlife economies and improve community livelihoods would be by way of a case study. And this is the case study of the institution that I'm currently with, which is the Wildlife Producers Association of Zambia. And I'll talk us through the role that industry associations, private sector, as well as NGO players, the role that these institutions can play in trying to ensure that we have a more inclusive wildlife economy, and therefore increase or improve, community livelihoods. So about the Wildlife Producers Association of Zambia, we are a membership-based association. We exist primarily to foster the growth of private wildlife estate and community development here in Zambia. How we do that is we stimulate interests of regular Zambians in this industry, wildlife production, aka game ranching and its associated value chain. We also provide technical information. We centralize data, so we do quite a bit of research as well. We represent the interests of our members, and then we also inform members about necessary legislation. So vice versa, sort of like in between our members and the government. We set up our first full-time secretariat in 2020. The association has been around for a while, but we've never really had a full-time secretariat, which is people on the job nearly 24/7. And I'll get back to that when I speak about the Community Resources Board Association, who are similar to ourselves. We also compile industry data and report on the status of the private wildlife estate in Zambia. We have a membership database, so we're centralizing the data information. How many game ranches do we have in Zambia? What species are on there? How much legal game meat are we putting on the market? Because that's a big thing here in Zambia, et cetera, et cetera. We also create, and this is the community piece, an ecosystem of practitioners and industry players. So whilst the majority of our members are game ranchers or people who are within the associated value chain, we also have different members who are general practitioners within the wildlife economy ecosystem here in Zambia. Some of our main partners are obviously government partners like the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, Department of Veterinary Services. We also have some NGO partners such as Wildlife Crime Prevention, FZS, but also key are partners such as the Zambia Community Resources Board Association and the African Wildlife Economic Institute. And I'll get back to the Zambia Community Resources Board Association and why they're a critical partner, especially when we're discussing inclusive wildlife economy. So currently we're running a couple of projects, and our projects as an industry association fall into three main categories. We do policy and advocacy work. We are trying to work on updating technical information on the industry, and we also do quite a lot of communications and awareness. So I've given a brief on who we are as WPAZ. We're an industry association, mainly private sector. How is it that industry associations can create more inclusive wildlife economy? Well, my perspective is that we can do this through three main channels. The first is purely the fact that lobby work is cross-cutting, or we can ensure that lobby work is cross-cutting, knowledge building and transfer, as well as creating platforms for partnership engagement. And I'll just share some of the work that we've done so far within these three sort of overarching components to show how it is that we're able to create inclusive wildlife economies. So in terms of lobby and advocacy work, we interface quite a lot with the government of Zambia, really trying to push the agenda for private sector players, most of our members. What are the kinks in the system? What are the bottlenecks? What is working? What is not working? What do we need to have an enabling policy environment? What this means, therefore, is that we have the capability to be a more inclusive lobby organization. And what do I mean by that is the simple fact is that as Wildlife Producers Association of Zambia, we can lend our voice as well as our capability and resources to other institutions. A very good example is the Zambia CRB Association. Now, the Community Resources Board in Zambia is a governance structure at chiefdom level that interfaces with the Department of National Parks as well as chiefdoms and looks at the governance of natural resources at that level. And then they have an overarching association, which was set up a couple of years back, that is representative of the different CRBs across the country. So as you can imagine, that association exists to amplify the voices of the different communities around the country. And so they obviously have some legislative needs. There's certain pieces of legislation that they're pushing, policy, CBNRM, etc. What we do as WPAZ is, because we're essentially speaking to the same government institutions, we strategically lend our voice to the cause of institutions like the Zambia CRB Association. And in that way, we're helping create more inclusive wildlife economy, because a conducive environment for CRBs generally will also be quite a conducive environment for ourselves as private sector players. And we often say at WPAZ, a win for WPAZ is a win for the general sector. We're not in there pushing only for our members, even though we're a membership-based association. If the things we're pushing for go through, basically a win for WPAZ generally is a win for the sector at large. Back to the screen. Knowledge transfer. And I deliberately call this knowledge transfer and not capacity building, because I also like what Victor brought up in terms of indigenous knowledge systems. I think the transfer of knowledge is back and forth. It shouldn't always, or it shouldn't just be one way, at least in my opinion. And some of the work that we've been doing as WPAZ is we've been working very closely with true community game ranchers. And we've run some courses on enterprise development, how to set up a game ranch, what are the different enterprises that can be linked to the wildlife economy, and basically creating an enabling environment where they understand what it really takes to get involved in the wildlife economy. I think
sorry, Chanda, do you want to pause for the time being? Maybe we push across to Tariro, and then you can complete it when you're a bit better.
All right, thanks very much for bringing me to this quite informative and insightful discussion. Most of the things that I'm going to say here are things that have already been said by Victor. So I'm just going to make a rundown of the things that I also want to emphasize on from my own end. So firstly, I would like to say that the wildlife economy is not separate from the broad macroeconomic economy of the country. So the things that affect the broad economy also affect the wildlife economy. And so it is very important that some of those issues relating to the macroeconomy are also attended to. For instance, we look at the state of our economy at the moment, you see that there is a lot of instability, there's a lot of issues that deal with the way how people do business so that they can be profitable, which affect them. So from that end, I think it is the role of government to ensure that the macroeconomic fundamentals are actually in place to enable a stable macroeconomic environment that is attractive to investment and also carrying out business. And this relates to issues relating particularly with the government today, that it is marred with a lot of policy inconsistency. There are a lot of changes that always keep on happening here and there, some of which affect, for instance, we look at agriculture and also the wildlife economy, as we would want to call it. And some of these things also relate to the issues relating to the ease of doing business. So you would see that it is very important for government to provide a conducive environment. In that regard, I would also want to commend the government because of late they've come on board in terms of realizing the importance of the wildlife economy by kickstarting the process of wanting to find out what is the state of the wildlife economy. So that process, I think it needs to be commended, it needs to be probably stepped up so that we can actually, as a country, forward in terms of tapping into the potential that we have, because we have got massive natural resources. in the countryside, which can be tapped for the benefit of all the communities that we are talking about here. And then on the other hand, you would also see that there is need to increase the levels of research and development within the wildlife economy. We do have, for instance, various government departments, state universities, and even private players. So I would like to emphasize on the issue of stakeholders who are interested or who are part of this wildlife economy to work hand in hand with each other so that there is a lot of input in terms of capacity building to explore the various ways in which some of the natural resources can be tapped. So I think there is need to have a broad question there to say, how do we tap the wildlife resources so that they can benefit the people? Because you would see that in various communities, people do have ways in which they actually harvest or actually gather, or a way in which they can access those resources for their own benefit directly, without having to extend that to probably the broader economy. So in that respect, there is need to look at various ways in which the resources that are found in communities where they are can be tapped by investing in development of new products, for instance, and also investment in technology so that we can actually be able to maximize the levels at which we can increase the value that can be obtained from various resources. And then investment, there has to be also a very good environment for investment. For instance, in the broad ways of infrastructure, like when you look at the energy sector in the country, it is very important because if you look at it, you see that there are a lot of people who are energy poor, and because of that, they rely on the forests in terms of gathering firewood. But in the process, they also, lead to damage of some of the important species that provide fruits, that provide various products that are beneficial in terms of even medicine to others. And there is need to increase levels of production of energy that can be supplied to the people so that they can stop, direct reliance on firewood and natural ecosystems in that way. And then coming on to the issue of value chains, I think in most cases you will see that some of the wild resources that can be gathered are usually seasonal, and they can only be consumed during the time when they are available. So in terms of the research and development that I was talking about, it would be very, very much important, for instance, to invest in issues relating to post-harvest technologies, which can be used to package certain products so that they can be distributed to areas where, because when you look around the country, you see that certain products are only found in certain areas because we have got some endemic species, we have got some ways in terms of the environment where the prevailing environment actually promotes certain kinds of products to be extracted from each and every part of the country. So not everything is actually found everywhere. So in those areas where those things are found, there is need to find out in what way they can actually be accessed by the local people, but not only by the local people, but also so that they can actually spread, because the whole country is becoming, it's actually a market for all those products. So you just see that we do have quite a lot of middlemen, for instance, during the summer season, who gather, fruits, and they just bring them to the central points where they can distribute them and make money out of it. But we would like real value chain in terms of producing certain things in ways that are so standardized so that they can be found in the formal market. Because my feeling is that the wildlife economy is existing, but mostly in ways in which goods just exchange hands at the immediate level where they are provided or where they are actually found, without any kind of value addition that can actually come. So there is need to invest in ways in which, for instance, I can give you examples that I just noticed on social media here. As you can see, this is something that relates to the Mopani worms. Mostly, we have always been knowing that some people just gather them, they prepare them, they dry, and then because they can actually be used after a long period of time. But then you see someone is being innovative, and the key words here says somebody had to do it. And I think this is what is very important, because the investment that has to be done there to find out how those products can be packaged. As you can see, they've got different flavors that they're actually producing, and to try to appeal to the market. This is a way in which the market itself can be broadened in terms of making an appeal to those people who would be interested and also wanting to test those products. It is very important in that way. And then we also have this one here talking about kachasu. It's a liquor which is, if you go to the communities, you will see that it is an illicit brew, you see. But here it is someone here who is, so in my own view, there's nothing really that is particularly like trying to reinvent the wheel, you see. These things here are actually known because people do brew kachasu in the communal areas. But then it is illegal because of the regulations that are in place, which do not allow, because of the things that relate to standards, things that relate to quality, things that relate to, you know, the way how those products are actually produced from wherever they are produced to the consumer. But then someone here is trying to invest in. So I think in overall, there is need to look at ways in which various kinds of natural resources that we find from our immediate environment can be worked on in such a way that they can be produced, or they can add some value to them, which can allow those products to be moved from those places where they are found to the other places. For instance, like here you see this pioneering guy here who is producing this liquor, probably will make a very big market because this alcohol is going to be available to people who would be wanting to use it. So I think when looking at all the things that we find in the surrounding areas where people are found around the country, there are various examples that can be given where we do have wildlife products that can be harnessed, but mostly you see that they are actually only consumed within the vicinity where they are produced, and mainly because there isn't much value addition that is being done, and also people can easily access them. So to the immediate people who are available to actually access those, it will be beneficial for them in that instance. But then if they want to tap into it, they would also need to find ways in which they can also extend it to other areas. So in short, I would like to say that conservation per se must not be separated from livelihoods of people. It has to go hand in hand in such a way that whatever livelihood strategies that they actually craft within their surrounding areas, they are also going to benefit in such a way that they will be wanting to keep on doing it so that it becomes sustainable. So in that way, you would see that it is going to extend, because we are saying here we want to be so inclusive, we want to be so empowering, and we want to be so broad. So we have to start to plan at a local level where most of these things are happening so that people can really benefit. And when it comes to issues relating to new products, I think there is need for promotion in such a way that there has to be some levels of education and awareness. But this has to be based on the knowledge that the people already know that they have, and also the resources which they already have, and find out in which you can leverage on those resources. So my parting words will be that we need to find out ways in which we can tap those resources So there is need for more investment in terms of research to add value to wildlife products and also extend that to ways in which they can be marketed around the country. So you do see that the whole marketing process has to be sort of like invoked here, where we look at the product, where we look at the packaging in terms of how it is going to be prepared for the market, how it's going to be promoted, the pricing processes, the processes involving the production of those products have to be streamlined so that at least people can make it, because as long as people do not make any profit, because this is a business, I don't think that is going to be successful. So let me just
thank you, Tariro. Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off at this juncture. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. So if I could possibly ask Chanda to finish off briefly the 2 slides she's got left, and then we can go into the question and answer session, because there's quite a few questions, especially from myself.
Okay, thanks, Max. Thank you all for your patience. I hope you can see my screen. Thanks, Tariro, for that. I'll just quickly finish off. So we do the knowledge transfer, as I mentioned, and then another thing that is critical is creating platforms for partnership engagement. And these are spaces where you can catalyze action, you can share progress on governance and policy issues, but also connect different partners. Setting up platforms for partnership engagement also helps reduce, at least in our opinion, the silo mentality. Oftentimes, even as Victor alluded to, we're a community because of the geographic space or the things that we're trying to get done, but we're just not talking to each other enough to generate collective action around the things we need to get done. And so just to conclude, inclusive wildlife economies will take multiple players putting their best foot forward, because we need to have an enabling policy, learning, and practice environment. And also accountability, transparency, generosity of assumption and spirit are key. And I put this there because there is definitely need to assume the best of most of the players, or at least all of the players within this ecosystem, as we try to create more inclusive wildlife economies. And also we need to have generous spirits in the sense that we cannot exist only for our own benefit as a private sector industry association. Rather, we need to recognize that we can and should lend our voice and our power to others within the ecosystem to make it more inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chanda. I hope you're feeling a lot better now. Just thanks so much. We're going to move into the questions and answer session, so I'm not going to spend too much time going over what's just been said, but what's quite important is, from Chanda's side, is the advocacy work, not simply sitting here and waiting for government to bring out laws, but helping influence government in their crafting of the laws. We talk about what is a community, how do we get people together, how do we make sure that everybody benefits, and when the community speaks, it speaks with one voice, which will also help government in formulating policies. And another thing is, how do we tap into resources? One of the things is a question of poaching. A lot of people within the rural communities have been taught that killing game is poaching. How do you now get that mindset into an economy without them thinking that it's no longer poaching, so it's a free-for-all, and the sustainability? I don't know if anybody wants to attack that first before I go on to any other questions.
Mark, I would love to just give a brief on that. It is important for local communities to be socialized into understanding that wildlife can be viewed as their own personal property, just like livestock. The very day local communities understand that wildlife has value just like livestock, and then to them, they would treat it with respect with much adoration and love, just like they would tend their livestock. And therefore, communities will become the first line of defense and promoters of sustainability within their own spaces.
Max, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'll go to one of the audience's questions. Sorry about that. Mashudu Makoka said, thanks, Victor, for the presentation. You have just made me think deep on the issue of equitable sharing of benefits, tangible and intangible. But in the context of Southern Africa, how do we achieve that, given that we're still battling the question of the issue of land? If you could answer within the short space of time, because I know land is emotive and...
A good one. I would like to twist it a little bit, Max. The idea is that it's not about owning land. The idea is about security of tenure and ensuring that that right to security of tenure is respected by local authorities, by government. Because as long as you have a security of tenure and you have use rights, you can still derive benefits even without owning land. Yes, of course, the land question needs to be resolved, but we cannot wait until it has been resolved. We have been waiting for too long. We need security of tenure and promote use values and use rights to ensure that people continue to benefit fully from their resources.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving to another question. So I'm not going to give you all a chance to answer the same question because time is scarce, unfortunately. But one of the things, I'll throw this one out, is how do you get around communities, this is coming from Kennedy, being exploited by politicians and local governments, thereby losing faith? And maybe Zambia, Chanda, if you, seeing as you already have an association.
Thanks for that question. It's an interesting one. I think we're sort of, Africa is almost like coming into its own, at least in my opinion, with just the movement of information, the age that we're in. There is a lot more cohesion and understanding of what is going on. Communities have a lot more, I believe, power, and they're aware of that now. So I think that there is a lot less exploitation that's happening with communities, in my opinion, at least, over the last couple. I think the tide is changing a little bit. I'm not sure how we can get around, I'm not sure how we can get around this, except just pushing for more accountability, transparency, around natural resources. So if there is it doesn't matter whether it's an NGO, an industry association, a politician, a government department, if anybody is engaging with a community on natural resources management and benefit sharing, everybody should be brought to book. Accountability and transparency, and it should apply across the board. And I think that could go a long way and shift the power, as the saying goes.
Thank you so much. Another two questions from Dr. Tariro Kamuti, sorry. The first one is, what economic incentives exist to promote sustainable wildlife utilization in Southern Africa? And two, what controls exist in Zimbabwe to mitigate poaching under the guise of wildlife harvesting? I'd like to throw that open to whoever feels they'd like to answer. The first part, at least. Sorry, did you get that? So did you hear my question?
Yes.
Oh, is that a silence? Nobody answering? I
Sorry,
thought maybe
sorry.
No,
Sorry,
it just dropped here.
Oh, okay, sorry. The question was, what economic incentives exist to promote sustainable wildlife utilization in Southern Africa? That's the first question. And the second question is, what controls exist in Zimbabwe to mitigate poaching under the guise of wildlife harvesting? So regard them as two separate questions, and whoever, feel free to answer that.
Okay. I think, for instance, if you look at our in our case, we have always had a very successful model of community-based natural resources management under the Campfire program, where people almost like coexisted with wildlife, in the sense that they are the stewards or the guardians of the wildlife around their areas, and they are the first, you know, like what Victor said, the first levels of protection of that wildlife. And in those areas, they used to allow concessions for hunting, which would bring in revenue that would also be plowed back. Recently, I read that mostly you to see that the rural district councils used, because they are the ones who used to actually take the revenues. And because of issues relating to distribution, issues related to costs in terms of running some of those programs administratively, they were actually like taking the greater share of the revenues without having to extend to those people who are concerned. And recently I was reading that they are actually making some amendments in some of those areas to say that the revenue must go directly to the villages. That is, the heads of the villages and the communities have to decide how the money that is plowed into their areas is going to be used. So I think there is need to rework that model in that respect, to empower people to make decisions on their own, because they are the ones who suffer the consequences of also living with wildlife. Particularly, we look at issues relating to human-wildlife conflict. It is a very huge issue where people lose lives, they lose livelihoods when animals raid their fields of crops. So that is a way in which, if the people actually see that they're actually getting something that is coming to them directly, it is also a way in which they can also protect the wildlife, for instance. And so the harvesting per se, it has to be one in which, like when we talk about the research and development, where, like what Victor was talking about, eco-labeling, all those things, you know, the standards have also to be put in place so that people can actually see the ways in which, when they were actually extracting some of those resources, they have to be doing it with the underlying view that there has to be something that is remaining there, which has to keep on sustaining itself, other than over-harvesting. The issue of poaching, like what the other questioner was saying, it is a very, very important issue, because when you look at some of the species in terms of conservation, some of them, they will be endangered species. Some of them have got certain kinds of value that they are attached to scientifically in terms of the niche that they play within the ecosystems. And people need to be made aware of how they can actually utilize the resources without having to actually over-harvest.
Okay, thank you very much, Tariro. Just one last question, then we're going to go to the open session just now, but one question, it's going to be a very interesting one, from Rio Button. It's thanks very much for your insights, and it's addressed at you, Victor. Do you have any advice for delimiting a community for practical purposes? We've had issues when we open up protected areas to a specific community for harvesting. The community rapidly expands, and people who are not historically from the area claim to be able to get access, and then you have a lot more people harvesting than anticipated. What's your advice? And I think this is a very important point, that if one particular smallholder rural community is allowed in, how do you stop people from surrounding areas jumping in, or from areas outside, or even hundreds of kilometers away, suddenly coming and reaping where they did not sow?
That's a brilliant question, and one of the things that AWEI should consider exploring in terms of research and looking at best practices in the region. But my submission is, traditionally, communities are well defined. They become problematic when we start to use political boundaries. That's one thing that is problematic in the region, where you have political leaders dominating and overriding the authority of traditional leadership, traditional boundaries, and also the traditional customs, beliefs, and way of doing things. So that's the first approach one could take to say that if we are going to have full devolution, to have communities have full control over their resources, it should not be political. It should be traditional on the basis of those customs and traditions as defined by our norms and beliefs. And that is well defined in every community. And so years ago, systems used to self-govern without any political interference. So that's the starting point. We should start from there and then leverage on that to make sure that even political leadership, political boundaries can also learn from traditional leadership. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Victor. Also like to thank all the speakers for their fascinating views. This has been absolutely brilliant.